Hello everyone, welcome to the Product Marketing Show. I'm your host Rish, and today with me I have Ben Gilbert. Hi Ben, how are you doing?
Hi Rish, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
So Ben is VP Marketing for Spectrm. So Spectrm is a conversational messaging platform which powers many of the world's leading chatbots. He's also host of One-to-One Marketing Podcast. He's the founder for design services Vinyl Revolution. Ben, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rish. Looking forward to our conversation.
Before we jump in there, briefly give a shout out to our sponsors, Content Beta, a full-stack creative team on subscription for software companies. Create product marketing projects today and get delivery tomorrow. So Ben, you've always been a marketer, right? I mean, first with your own media startup and then Vinyl Revolution and now driving conversational messaging platform. What's it with marketing and you?
I mean, I learned marketing as a kind of necessity almost when I founded my own company. I think I've always had an interest in design, in branding and anything creative. And I saw marketing as a way to really use those creative skills in a way that had real applications for business. And so having learned how to do marketing to kind of grow and scale my own company, I then started working for Spectrm about 4.5 years ago and applied a lot of the skills that I'd learned there more in a B2B enterprise space. And it's been a very interesting ride ever since. And I'm excited to talk through some common marketing use cases today for ChatGPT and anything else.
Lovely. So today we're going to talk actually quite the opposite, right? So how not to use ChatGPT for marketing. ChatGPT has become so ubiquitous that everybody has become a self-proclaimed ChatGPT expert. I mean, you got an expert who says, hey, here are the 50 prompts you could use for email copywriting. Somebody's going, hey, here are the 50 prompts you can use for writing scripts. Can you take us through what are the common use cases you see of ChatGPT with marketing today?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there a little bit, right? I think the big innovation around product, ChatGPT is not so much the large language model itself, but really it's kind of like a product innovation by creating this chat interface and then training it to be very friendly and extroverted. I think large language models have been around for a while, but I think this accessible interface through chat is really what made interest in kind of these technologies explode. And you're right, you see a lot of armchair experts on ChatGPT on LinkedIn and elsewhere these days with those types of things. I think what's most interesting is obviously the prompts are key there. So there's a reason why people are, really honing in on what types of prompts for different functions. And copywriting is obviously the biggest core function that people are using it for right now. But I've also seen a lot of really interesting ones that go into, both like technical SEO kind of capabilities of writing markup for pages, of doing like deep keyword research using ChatGPT, getting related keywords for kind of pillar content pages. Seen a ton of use cases around building email marketing sequences, obviously that need to be edited, but kind of that implement some best practices as far as the types of cadences. And then I've even seen things that people do in terms of building Google Sheets plugins to do data enrichment on kind of titles and emails, and also kind of cleaning up data there. I think that's a very interesting one because I think a lot of marketers spend a lot of time in Google Sheets. Data enrichment is obviously a big one, keeping a clean database. And so I think that's where I think there's a lot of interesting things going on in this space with ChatGPT specifically. Where I'm more skeptical are people that talk about doing prospect research. So I think you see a lot of prompts around, give me the core challenges of this particular persona at this account, or like tell me about how I should be addressing this particular audience. And while I think that's useful for like very surface level understanding of your target audience, it's not going to give you deep insight, right? You're going to have much better insights if you're actually talking to customers directly. That's really foundational marketing work. So I wouldn't trust something like ChatGPT to really give you a solid foundation for all your marketing activities in that way. And it's important to remember that they hallucinate, right? So like they can give you inaccurate information, and that's something that you obviously don't want to base your entire marketing strategy around. I think another big one as far as how not to use ChatGPT is just to use whatever copy it spits out and immediately put that in emails and landing pages, because I think we have to remember these are probability engines, right? They are trying to spit out the most likely words based on your prompt. And I think marketing is about differentiation and creating a unique connection with your audience. And if you use the most likely words on the internet based on your prompts, you're obviously not going to do a very good job of differentiating yourself.
I think talking about differentiation, I had installed one of the Chrome extension on my for using LinkedIn. What it does is whenever you see a LinkedIn post, it gives you like an opposite view, like a controversial or a counter view of that argument, and it makes you, it generates like a couple of comment ideas for you. And although they're not usable directly, but I really love that because it helps me at least 30-40% of the time to do the research about that topic.
Yeah, I think that's a great example where it's a great starting point, right? I think that's what a lot of copywriters are seeing this as well, is like if you want to use something like ChatGPT, use it to get past the initial writer's block and staring at a blank page. But then, you really have to bring your own unique insight, your own experience to really hone that message and to ultimately stand out. And like you said, on LinkedIn, you can maybe get an idea or two for the type of comment that you might want to add to help increase engagement with your own profile and that sort of thing. But at the same time, you don't want to just spit out what ChatGPT is saying, because you need to add your own positioning. You need to add your own kind of process into that as well.
Nice. Now, how can businesses go beyond copywriting? How can they use ChatGPT today beyond just copywriting?
Yeah, I think this is where this space is most exciting, right? And I would differentiate a bit between ChatGPT-3 and then the actual large language models behind that, like GPT-3. And I know GPT-4 is coming out. There are other ones out there as well. I think there's a few that I would call out. For me, a huge one is going to be about connecting internal and kind of proprietary databases and information, right? If you think about something like knowledge management within an organization, right? Like the amount of times within large companies that new hires or that just anyone on a team is looking for information about how something works at the company, they're taking up other people's time, or they're having to trawl through wikis that are not very easy to search. By embedding kind of internal knowledge into these systems, these people can have a chat style interface to get answers to those questions, and where that you can get the information from an internal database, so that it's actually accurate to your company. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. I also think in terms of product search, just search in general, we're seeing a lot of stuff with Bing and Google come out right now about how they're going to be integrating these technologies into search in a conversational way. I think there will be a lot going on in that space. We've also seen a lot of blunders along the way with the launches of Google and Bing Chat. But it's obviously an interesting space where a lot is going to be happening. Two others I would maybe point out are just on the code side. So I think a lot of people are using things about writing, simple English prompts, and it's converting it into SQL queries, into kind of landing page layouts, CSS, that sort of thing. So kind of making coding much more accessible to people that don't have those skills. And then even I've seen examples of companies that use it to relieve technical debt of legacy code in their systems by helping new developers kind of identify, okay, what is the current state of the code base? Where does this stuff live? So all like kind of unique ways in which these language models can be applied to real business problems. And obviously for me, working in the chatbot space, I think that is the most exciting one, right? Is we obviously can't let people access and interact directly with these types of like AI chatbots when it's for a brand, because brands need to control the messaging that is coming out of those, and they need to kind of build a very brand-specific understanding of how they interact with customers. And so the space I'm most excited about, because of our work at Spectrm, is learning how we can use these types of intelligent chatbots and then deploy them in things like messaging apps, on WhatsApp, on Instagram DMs, on Messenger, to actually interact directly with customers. And there's a number of things that we need to be careful about in terms of how we build that.
Lovely. You're actually taking me to the next question. So Although conversational messaging means, I mean, it can talk the human language, pretty much close to a human language, but I mean, why are prompts so important? I mean, is it also important when you talk about conversational messaging, or only it's important when you handle your research on ChatGPT?
Yeah, I mean, prompts are essential, right? And I think it's not just in the messaging space or kind of any other use case. It really is the core of getting utility out of these products, right? Because as I said, it's a probability engine, so it's going to give you the most likely kind of text based on your prompt. And so the prompt becomes the foundation for all of that, and not just the first one, but how you choose to kind of refine the answer that it gives you as well, right? Because we can give it a highly structured prompt, and then based on its response, because it's able to hold context, we can also iterate and improve with additional prompts. And so I think making ChatGPT and GPT-3 and other large language models very relevant for business is really going to be about creating products that sit between the large language model and users and enable to structure prompts consistently. And I think chatbots are a perfect example of that, right? They're a huge opportunity for brands, but I think it's obvious you can't just have a customer interact with an AI chatbot and assume that it's going to drive an outcome that's valuable for your business. I've referenced Bing Chat before. I think these last few weeks, there's been a lot of really interesting stuff coming out around, these alter egos that Bing Chat had in terms of like Sydney, Fury, these things that while Microsoft did a very, tried a lot to control the types of responses that it would give customers, people were able to shift around those constraints by getting the chatbot to act like something that was not itself. And I think it gave a clear example of the dangers of just opening up these models to interact directly with your customers. And I think there's a number of things that businesses need to keep in mind when they do want to launch like an intelligent chatbot on things like messaging channels. And so what we've built at Spectrm is really about unlocking the value of those large language models, but for marketing teams that need to control those customer interactions to create really positive customer experiences that ultimately lead to brand loyalty.
Interesting. And where are the common areas you see people using chatbots the wrong way, or do you think chatbots could go wrong?
Yeah, I think there's a number of key things. I mean, if we take the example of just connecting something like ChatGPT-3 and allowing it to interact with your customers, I think there's 6 or 7 ways that I would think about that are the kind of the key ways that it could go wrong. One is just business relevant input, right? It really needs to understand a brand's internal knowledge versus just pulling from the open internet. So you need to feed it things like your product feed, CRM data, like FAQ data, website data that isn't public necessarily. And by giving it that internal data, you're allowing it to kind of read from things that are unique to your company, that are not always public, and then use that information to interact with customers better. So I think business relevant input is a really important one. People might not be thinking about all the time. Brand safety is a huge one. So chatbots hallucinate, right? That's a big thing, big criticism of them right now is that they can give inaccurate information. They can give damaging information. Obviously, in an intimate messaging space directly with a customer, you absolutely don't want a chatbot to be hallucinating or giving them false information about your company or products. And so there needs to be safeguards in place for brand safety to avoid that. As marketers, I think on-brand communication is also something that's very important, right? We don't just want a kind of large language model to create unscripted responses to customers, because we want to maintain tight control over communication with customers and tailor copy, right? And so it's very important to script responses rather than just having the AI generate a response. We use, people are very careful about the messaging they put on social, about what they put on their websites, and while they're still using AI to get ideas, there's a lot of editing that goes into that. So that needs to happen in the chatbot space too. I think another one is continuous learning for me, right? We need to continuously learn from the messages people are sending us, and that requires some human supervision and training, right? I think ChatGPT has the kind of feedback to all of the prompts, right? That's how it developed in the way that it did. But I think for brands, they need something like that, but even more specifically to really build like a library of how customers interact with them and then to respond accordingly. And then there's basic ones. I think the last few are really just faster responses and lower costs, right? If you're interacting with a large language model every single time that someone asks a question, that gets very, very expensive because you're doing a lot of computation and you don't respond as quickly as you could if you have if you can identify intent and then respond. And the last big one, I think, for enterprise is just security, right? Like, you don't want to share all of your sensitive messaging data with customers with a third-party vendor like ChatGPT-3. So I think you need a buffer in between those systems in order to control the flow of information. And I think there's a lot of companies in the space, Spectrm included, that are working on kind of solutions to that for enterprise to enable access to this technology while maintaining kind of the safety, the learning, and the security that I just mentioned.
So if you think Spectrm sits between ChatGPT and enterprise chatbot so that the data is secured and you can safeguard, you can have this safeguard rails so that it doesn't go off brand.
Exactly. And so the ways that you can integrate something like GPT-3 is, to generate intents, right? So if someone messaged your brand and said, do you ship abroad? But you want to, there's hundreds of ways that a customer could actually have that intent, but ask that question. And so you can create variations of that intent very quickly with GPT-3 prompts, right? So doing that and then validating it, having a marketer just go through and say, yes, these are all like that intent. And then you can create a scripted response. Again, using GPT-3, you could say, hey, based on this intent, can you generate a response for me? And then you can update the tone, say, okay, I want it to be more playful, or I want it to be more conversational or more serious. And then again, by structuring prompts in that way, we can actually create scripted chatbots that you ultimately still control. So it's always when a customer does, come into Instagram and ask your brand, for example, do you ship abroad? Rather than actually querying the large language model and using GPT-3, it's in a contained system where you've already identified that customer intent and created a scripted response. And so you're able to react much faster and kind of in an on-brand way.
Awesome. Now, the way generative AI is growing, initially it started with copywriting. Now I think they're coming up with images, like custom images and custom videos. Where do you think the future is, and how should brands adopt?
Yeah, it's going to be a huge space. I think there's so much hype around it right now, but I think that it's going to be even bigger than people really expect it to be. And I think it's going to be hard to also separate sometimes the reality from the marketing, because there's a number of use cases out there right now. If I think about image generation, there's amazing results, but then there's also some really poor results. And so you can't go into it just expecting really high-end output every time. There's a lot of iteration and there's a lot of training that has to go into that, but I think it will get better very, very quickly. I can speak more specifically on like the marketing use cases than other industries. I think there's other industries where there's pretty crazy use cases happening, where people are building chatbots that they don't want to control because they want them to be able to like essentially interact with humans and connect with humans in like a very unique and specific way. But on the marketing side, obviously copy is the simplest, right? I think copy is the core use case right now. Image generation, like video editing, those things are really streamlining workflows for marketers. But when it comes to copy, there's kind of the use case beyond just the generation of copy that I mentioned, but also like the intents, right? Helping brands generate tons of different intents to actually understand what their customers are saying. And then I think connecting internal data is where it's going to be very interesting. I'm sure that there are lots of products that will come out that are going to help brands connect product feeds, connect their CRM, connect like their internal knowledge bases to these systems so that they're either able to interact directly in a brand specific way with customers or with their own employees. So I think there is where we're going to see a lot of innovation in the product. And at Spectrm, we see this as there's two layers to this development. So we have, how do you generate copy, right? How do you generate new intents to better understand your customers? But eventually it will be, how do you generate an entire chatbot structure, for example, right? Like how do you, we know that people respond and engage much more when they're guided instead of having to constantly ask questions, right? When they're given their own prompts and kind of like product carousels and quick reply chips to interact with a chatbot, that's what you tend to see all over, because it really increases engagement because people are usually lazy and they'd like to be guided to a solution. And so finding a way to really understand, okay, analyze an entire database of chatbots and then help marketers build entire conversation structures, for example, to guide shoppers to the right product, or, you know, to get information about a lead and then like suggest, you know, next steps in their buyer journey that might be relevant to them in terms of content or like other places that they can go to get information. I think that's where there's going to be a lot of interesting things happening. You know, this space is so new. Even companies, you know, like we've been in the large language model space for about 5 years now. We've been working. There's plenty of other vendors and kind of solutions that have as well. And I think this explosion in consumer interest as a result of ChatGPT has really only benefited generative AI as an industry. But it also means that there's going to be a lot of people coming into the space with less background, you know, less knowledge about how these things work. And so I think it's always important to have a grain of salt to the existing potential of ChatGPT and also the ways not to use it for marketers, so that we don't end up in a world where everyone is undifferentiated, where there's infinite content that is of no value to people because everything is the same. I think it's going to be very important to build unique products to essentially build unique experiences on top of the generative AI.
Lovely. This episode was deep. I mean, my number one takeaway was, hey, as a marketer, just don't like huck ChatGPT way too much because it lacks differentiation today. Thank you so much, Ben, for taking out time and sharing your insights. If our listeners or viewers would like to get in touch with you or would love to learn more about Spectrm, what's the best way?
Yeah, I'd love to hear from anyone on feedback for anything that I've talked about today, or just to connect. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Benjamin Gibert. It's Gibert. And I work for Spectrm, so you can also search spectrm.io. Check out our website to learn more about what we're doing in the chatbot space, or look at Spectrm on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you so much for taking.
Thank you, Rish.